And thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I know you're busy, and so really appreciate this. Really appreciate your time. So I guess we'll start off with, could you just share a little bit about your background and what led you to education to begin with, and just some about the pathway that has led you to where you are now?
Sure. Well, I'm originally from New York City. I'm one of 3 children. I'm a first-generation college graduate. My mother worked as, anybody who worked with will tell you she was a reading teacher. But she was a paraprofessional in New York City for more than 30 years. And my dad was a police officer in New York City. In 7th grade, my teacher pulled me aside. She was from Atlanta, Georgia. She told me about the history of Morehouse College. And when she was done talking with me, she looked at me and said, "You're going to Morehouse College." And that was pretty much that. So that I talk a lot about teachers being influencers. Sometimes when we realize it and when we don't. I'm not sure what her intention was that day or if she realized the impact, but I applied to one school 5 years later and attended Morehouse here in Atlanta. I went to school for political science, thought I was going to be a lawyer. I watched a lot of LA Law in the 80s and 90s and liked the fact that there was a white guy there, Corbin Burnson, who wore double-breasted suits, got all the girls and argued and won arguments in court. And then there was a Latino brother, Jimmy Smits, did the same thing. And then there was a black brother, Blair Underwood. And I'm thinking to myself, I want to be a lawyer. That's a pretty good gig. They get to argue, get all the girls, drive the nice cars. And then a very influential professor from Spelman College came to me and just basically said, "The children need you, and I have a program for you." So I switched gears and attended, I got my master's from University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, elementary education, and became a school teacher. Loved every minute of it. And my wife says I have restless spirit. So eventually I needed a change, fell in love with leadership. And from there, my next ambition was to coach and consult leaders and teachers all over. And that's what I do today. Long answer to your short question.
Yes. Well, thank you. So can you share what you think is your greatest accomplishment in education, and maybe a couple of your accomplishments that you feel like are something worth sharing, and then maybe talk about some of the challenges that you faced?
Sure. Well, I've got 30 years next year, so it's hard to narrow things down to one. I'll tell you one of recent memory. I've had the great just fortune and honor to be somewhat recruited to this work, even though I accosted him first, by Rick DeFore and his wife, Becky DeFore. He, along with Jeff Jones from Solution Tree, they kind of opened the door for me to do this kind of work. And one of my greatest things I take most pride in was, once I learned who Rick and Becky were, along with Dr. Bob Aker, and God rest their souls, Dr. Rick DeFore, I got to spend hundreds of hours, scores of days at events and conferences working together. My family, they became family friends. Our family spent time in their homes. And one of my proudest moments is that I never took 1 second of being around them for granted, whether we were playing tennis or he was critiquing some of my work or helping me to edit a book. It didn't matter. If we were breaking bread at dinner or, delivering content together, I never took 1 second for granted. Not 1 second. And we were very familiar. We were very familiar friends. And so that makes me proud. And also, I guess my other proudest moment is it's not a moment in education, it's more of a mindset. I've never been the best teacher in the world. I was never the best leader. However, I walked into education with, what I call the thermostat mindset. And so my expectations were never based on kids. They were never based on the population. It was never based on the class I got. It was never based on anything except what I believed expectations should be. So I was a thermostat teacher from day one. I had a very ideal mindset about what my class should look like, what I should expect from them. And so I set the temperature, I set the thermostat really high. And no matter where the kids came in, what their temperature was when they walked into the class, my goal was to grow them to it. And if I had something that had grown past my expectations, then I've got to raise my expectations. But my expectations were never based on my population. I've worked in districts that were very well funded and my expectations were high. And then when I arrived to Atlanta, I inherited the worst performing school in the district and the worst performing district in the greater Atlanta area. And my expectations were just as high with support. So that to me is the mindset we should have as teachers and leaders, a thermostat mindset as opposed to a thermometer mindset. Way too many schools base their expectations on what they see coming in the door. And at best, progress is going to inch along. That's not visionary leadership. So I'm proud of that as well.
This past year has brought a lot of challenges for everyone in terms of the pandemic and COVID. Can you talk a little bit about the adjustments you've had to make and maybe something that you learned during this time?
Well, I mean, what we're doing right now is one thing I've learned is that we got to learn to leverage technology. I'm old school. I want to meet with people. I want to see people. I want to feel the energy in the room. This type of communication has existed for more than a decade. And I would get offers to do it in dribs and drabs, maybe once or twice a year. And I never liked it, but I had to learn to like it and learn to get better at it. And so, you know, being able to turn on a dime is really important. And that's what my example is super minor in the grand scheme of things. I mean, teachers and educators and support staff and support professionals turned an entire industry upside down in a weekend. And so,
Exactly.
yeah. So I guess one thing I'm proud of is, you know, after coming out of a catatonic state for about 3 weeks, you know, you had to learn to reinvent yourself some. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I was in a catatonic state for about 3 weeks. You were watching your calendar just melt away and you're not sure if your message is gonna be as relevant moving forward. So that's, so one of the things I think the pandemic has taught us is that less is more. We've been complaining for 50 years that we got too much to teach and too little time, right? And now we have an opportunity to bring that to pass. And it's gonna really challenge us to walk our talk and make sure less is more. I think another thing we learned is to assume nothing with kids. There was a lot of hand wringing last summer about kids coming back broken and shattered and damaged. And you know, I heard very, very strong teachers talking about, on the one hand, all this learning loss, and on the other hand, I'm not gonna engage in instruction for 3 weeks because I need to hold my kids and hug them and make sure they're okay, and SEL and SEL, all important stuff, but it was based on nothing except perceptions and projection, well-intentioned, but again, assume nothing, prepare for everything, right? And respond based on evidence. And I think what we found is, while, yeah, it's been definitely disruptive, the kids have been pretty resilient. Kids have been pretty resilient. And I mean that in the states that opened earlier and ones that, I mean, there are a couple of major cities like opening this week for the first time in a year. And kids have been more resilient than we expected. And I think it teaches us a lesson to assume nothing and be careful about projecting brokenness on them. Because what turns out happening is the students in our care who can least risk being perceived as broken are the ones who suffer most, right? Because we project brokenness on them, and then our work goes from missionary work to charity work, and there's a whole different mindset to that. I think one of our biggest challenges is, as we open things back up and we try to figure out what this new normal is, to not try to go back and wear the same shoes we were wearing before. You know what I mean? We've got to figure out a way to be better on the other side of this. And that's a challenge because our industry is slow to change. As much as we usher in the next generation, we are the profession that creates all professions. We have challenges with change, and we will typically go back and try to do everything we've done before versus taking a step back and asking, what is it we can change and be better at moving forward.
Hey, in terms of leadership, what advice would you give or have you given to new leaders stepping into an administrative role for the first time? To an assistant principal role, principal?
You mean
what advice would you give them?
With the pandemic lens on, or just in general?
Just in general.
Okay, great.
Just in general.
So advice I give to new leaders, assistant principals or principals, is, and it sounds so cliche, but why drives everything? Why drives everything? This is mission-driven work, and your number one task is to hunt, gather, protect, and defend. Is to establish what we're about, why we exist, why do we do this work? Is it learning for all or learning for some? And then your next most important role is to hunt, gather, protect, and defend for your classroom. The adults are your classroom. Sometimes new leaders want to be everything to everyone all the time. And they're visiting classrooms and taking small groups of kids and so forth and so on. I'm not saying those things aren't right. What I'm saying is sometimes that gets in the way of your priority, right? For a classroom teacher, the kids are their classroom. Like, that's their classroom. For principals and assistant principals, the adults, that's your classroom. So make sure you're taking care of your adults. And the most important, the thing I learned the hard way is buy-in doesn't occur on the front end. It doesn't occur trying to convince folks or PD folks into buy-in or article them into buy-in. You build shared knowledge those ways, but ultimately buy-in comes from everyone engaging in work and then getting new experiences and results from engaging in the work. And then buy-in happens. When you get new results, when you get better results, that's when people buy in. So that's a lesson I didn't learn early on. I tried to convince, persuade, guilt people into doing the work. And when I realized that part of what makes leadership a challenge is you got to ask folks to do the work sometimes before they think they're ready to do the work, before they want to do the work, before they might be excited to do the work. You got to provide them with a why, a reason to change. And you can provide them with the resources and supports to execute that change. And then the biggest task for me was to make sure everyone was engaged in executing best practice. And I tell new leaders that up front, that your gift card game is going to take a hit sometimes, that this is not a popularity contest, and implementing new practice isn't about everyone being on board and agreeing to on the front end. That's not how life works. Your job is to make sure that if we've made a case for implementing a new common assessment protocol and people are clear on why it's happening, it's aligned with our mission, the resources and supports are in place, your job is to make sure everyone is doing that work. Not everyone wants to do it or is excited about it or is bought in. They're not going to buy in until they execute the protocol with fidelity, get new results from the way their teams are working together, get new results based on what they do with the assessment data. That's when people buy in. And that's a message I don't hear a lot with new leaders, and I think it's one that I think we need to bang the drum harder on that one, because leaders come in and I talk to them all the time and I'm coaching them and they're really frustrated because they can't get things moving because they're waiting for people to be bought in, and that's not how it works.
I think it's real important what you said about the why, because I know that in my experience, that's something that I forgot at different times in leadership was talking about the why. We talk about the how and the what, but sometimes we forget the why. And I think that's really important.
That's so true, Dr. Davis. We talk about the how and the what so much. And sometimes we don't even start with the why. And then when we do, we expect the 1 or 2 times we talk about it, like pre-planning days, to carry us through the whole year. And that's just not how why works. I use the example of Chick-fil-A a lot. I've never gotten bad service from a Chick-fil-A. I may have some fries that weren't done as much as I want them to, but they'll take care of that right away. I've never had a bad service experience at a Chick-fil-A, and I've been the ones in the hood, in the suburbs, in really nice areas, in tough areas. It does not matter. It doesn't matter what city. I travel the nation. I've always had positive experiences. They all sound like they mean it when they say my pleasure. And I've asked why. Like, why is that? They just find people who just wake up in a good mood all the time, or folks who have no trouble going on in their lives? No. They talk about that why, like that part of their customer service. They are constantly talking about it, constantly reinforcing it, constantly holding up examples of when it's working, constantly addressing examples of when it's not working. They do it to the point of what Rick DeFore used to say, boorish redundancy. And that's why you get 99.9% of people tell you get a positive experience every time you walk in there. It's because that why is at the center of everything they do. And we've got to do the same thing.
The culture. It's the culture. Okay, my next question. What do you think, in your opinion, what do you think public education might look like 20 years from now in terms of, I know this is a loaded question, I guess, but in terms of equity, and what do you foresee education looking like? And I know earlier you
You're breaking up just a little bit. You said in terms of equity. You broke up just a little bit.
Yes, and technology.
Boy,
technology.
Boy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wow, what's happening here?
I can hear you now.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so yes, in terms of equity, funding, just the entire educational world, do you see that changing a lot, or what do you foresee that to look like in the future?
Boy, that's a great question. I'm relatively apolitical, and I don't mean national politics. I mean in terms of district leadership and board leadership and legislation and how all that goes. I'm kind of a nose to the grindstone. Like wherever I am, that's what I focus on most. And so I've not ever moved past school leadership. When I know what I wish for. This is less about trends. I'm not super versed in trends, but what I wish for is a way for us to delve a little more into personalized learning. I don't have the how yet, admittedly. I had the honor of keynoting the National Alternative Education Conference a couple of years ago. And there I got to engage with the best alternative education programs around the country, and then subsequently got to work with some of those schools, on their campuses. And what I found is they have a way of, the best of those schools have a way of implementing personalized learning in ways that we at brick and mortar regular ed schools have been talking about for years. And I know that a lot of those schools have kind of a stink of, those are the kids that this is the last resort, and they've been XY not successful in the brick and mortar regular ed setting, and so they're at the school. But we got to clear some of that fog away and really look at what they're doing, because the best of those schools engage kids in personalized learning in ways that we only talk about. So I wish that for them. My other wish, right, and this is more of, again, I'm not answering your question about trends, but I'm hoping that I keep banging the drum and someone listens. I would love to see things like what my colleague Brian Butler talks about. I want to see the gifted curriculum be the floor of every classroom, like the floor, like that's where we start. And it's more about the mindset and approach to it, because there's a self-fulfilling prophecy to when you walk in and you've been told these kids are gifted, you know, how we approach them as teachers, how we talk with them, and how we give them a reputation to uphold, how we make, you know, we teach at the highest level of the standard and scaffold is appropriate. A lot of the things, those elements of gifted education should be the floor of every classroom. Because again, the best gifted educators I've seen are visionary. They don't base their expectations on the kids when they walk in. They've got this place where they're gonna take them. It's up here, and I'm gonna grow every kid to it. As opposed to what we typically do, you know, on the regular ed side of things is we see the kids coming in, we see their issues, we see where they're from, we do all this math in our heads, and then we calibrate our expectations that way. So I would love to see gifted education, the approach to it and the curriculum be the floor of every classroom. And that way, every student has access and opportunity to high levels of learning. Every kid has access and opportunity to that kind of very invigorating and engaging instruction. And then kids who come in who are actually more proficient than others because of their backgrounds or their background knowledge, they also have a place to go. So they're not, you know, your kids who come in more prepared or more proficient aren't left twisting in the wind, because that's a problem as well. I acknowledge that. So that's my wish. If those are the two things I think about a lot moving forward.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your work in Arkansas. I know that you have been having sessions with the Arkansas River Educational Co-op, which is, I'll have to give a little shout out to my friend Mike Walker there. He invited me to attend those this year, and they've been wonderful. I've really, really enjoyed those sessions, and I'm looking forward to the next couple that we're going to have with you. So could you talk just a little bit about your work with them, how that came about, and kind of what your goals are, I guess, or what they were for this year in terms of those sessions that you've led for us?
Well, it's a great question, a great segue. And I too, you know, like I told you in the email, you know, I have your Arkansas organization and Mike Walker, he didn't know this, but I mean, he reached out to me at a time when, you know, my calendar was melting before my eyes. And this is not a hobby for me. This is what I do for a living. And so even though he didn't do that because he knew my calendar was melting away, but just the timing of it has made me very loyal to Arkansas and that organization. And I've loved every session we've done. My overarching goal with those leaders was to simultaneously acknowledge the insane challenges they're experiencing this year and treat them like they're gifted. Those are my two goals. Like I'm gonna try to empathize, but I'm telling you, I'm coming in hot and I'm gonna treat you like you're gifted. So I thought the best approach would be there's gonna be a new normal at some point, right? There's gonna be a new normal, and the major parts of our work are gonna be the major parts of our work, even when we come out of the other side of this. So my approach was to prepare you for that. So my goal was to approach leadership not as if everything was fine, not as if there's no pandemic that exists, but you know, one of the first things I told the group is, I know we're in a pandemic, I know things are crazy, but we're open for business. We're open for business. And in our field, it's easy to get caught up in all the things that aren't working, all the things that are wrong, and all the things that are challenges. And I'm gonna say this, it may not be popular, but we tend to spin out into what I call martyr mindset, like martyrdom, victimhood. And I go on social media every once in a while and just like peek with one eye open, one eye squinted, and you just see folks going down these rabbit holes about all that's wrong. And a lot of it is true, that's the thing. But what can we do? We're open for business. So I'm going to treat this like we're open for business, and then our group can push back, give input and feedback, and we can calibrate things from there. But I'm going to come in like we're open for business. And so whether it's making sure that we keep the why of the work in front of us, right? Instead of submitting to chaos, mayhem, and disorder, we've got the why is more important than ever, right? Instead of making every conversation an ancillary conversation about race and culture and bias and social justice, which can become a distraction. Those are legitimate issues. I want to look at the racial, social justice, bias issues that exist on your campus right now, that you don't need to go to the store for this. You don't need to read another book. I'm telling you, there are things right here, right now, today that you can deal with, starting with what I call that universal equity. So those have been my two pushes, is to keep the why in place. Like this is the time where you've got to hold on to that why. The antidote to chaos is control, and the why is something you can control. And the other is, with all the emphasis on equity and social justice and racism out here, you have things there right in front of you. They're right in front of you. Let me show them to you, and these are the things that move the needle, right? You don't need special training on this. You don't need to bring it to do a book study yet. Let's take care of the things that are right there on your plate right now. They're there every day. And I want to shine a light on them to show you that you've got equity and social justice issues that you can address starting tomorrow. And it's just been, I've really enjoyed the time. I love the 1 hour format, because I'm not crazy. I know how big, listen, I've never led schools during a pandemic, but I know how tough it was to take an hour out to, attend a meeting, attend a training, whatever it is. So I love the format. I love the sequence, and it's been great getting to know folks and arming them with some strategies and tools to move forward during these crazy times.
The format, I agree with you. The format's been great. I know that just like you said, the 1 hour is difficult sometimes to anytime, but I think those have been, the format's been great. And I've really appreciated you being with us this year, and you have definitely been a light to me personally. I've enjoyed it. It's been great. You were definitely on my, last year I caught a glimpse of you on social media. I think a video or something you had, and I thought, I need to see this guy. I need to go, and so then when Mike reached out to me and he said, hey, we're going to have these Zoom sessions. Would you like to join us? I was all in for that. So
awesome.
Really appreciate that, and the work you've done, and the influence and impact that you've had here in Arkansas with our group. And I know that you're doing that across the nation. So that's incredible. And I thank you for that. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So Ken, that really wraps up all of my questions.
Awesome.
For you today. Do you have anything you want to add, or
boy,
any additional things to share?
Well, follow me on Twitter at Unfold the Soul, and I'll send you some information on how to get in touch with me. The last thing I'll say, because I know the timing of this newsletter is to finish strong.
Absolutely
strong. Listen, springtime, it's that time of year anyway where, we always say the kids are going nuts, and oh my God, the kids are off the chain. It's warm outside and fights are breaking out, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I did an informal research study at my own school, right? In the third year of hearing the same lament. And some of what I found was, when springtime came, after spring break and after testing was done, some of my teachers started slowly shutting things down in their classrooms, right? Displays start coming down. We start moving from showing a quick YouTube clip to watching full feature movies, the 2-3 extra recesses here and there, things like that. When we start breaking routine with kids, like it contributes to some of the springtime mayhem we want to put on them completely. It's not always them. It's that break in routine. So that's one thing. Finish strong. We can't talk about learning loss on the one hand and then kind of shut it down when it starts getting warm on the other hand, right? Whether your district is doing testing or not, it doesn't matter. Prepare kids for next year, finish strong. We're gonna feel so much better about this thing. Don't succumb to victimhood. Everybody's catching hell all over the place, and we've got a choice whether or not to succumb to it or find something we can control. Less is more. You can't cover everything you did last year, so constrain the properties and stay focused on the work. And lastly, take a moment when it's all said and done, and just some quiet moments, if not by yourself, but with your staff, and acknowledge some of the things you learned from this year. You know, acknowledge some of the things you learned, how you got better, and how we're going to get better moving forward. And thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Appreciate
You're
your
welcome.
time.